Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of a Fireside Chat about Taboo Topics series, which is a series of conversations that are near and dear to my heart, all about the dark and the taboo and all the things we societally don't speak enough about. And today we are bringing this topic of PMS and PMDD. PMS meaning premenstrual syndrome, which can show up in a myriad of physical and psycho-emotional ways, like migraines, bloating, water retention, congestion in the time leading up to your period, but also things like fatigue, listlessness, mood swings. And then there is also something that might be called PMS on steroids, so like an exacerbated form of premenstrual syndrome, which is called PMDD, Pre-Menstrual Dysphoric Disorder, which is usually more pronounced on the psycho-emotional level. And it is an intense experience for those who suffer from it, up to the point of possible suicidal ideation. So trigger warning, we might today talk about the fact that when someone is in that state, they question everything, including, does this life even make sense? This is, of course, this state very taxing on the nervous system, especially when you don't understand that this may be connected to your menstrual cycle experience, which it is. So I really want to raise awareness about this today, and also provide some ideas of how you can support yourself or how you can support a loved one through this. Me, that is Lisa Yara. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a womb health practitioner supporting women and menstruating folks in their cyclical experience, especially with menstrual cycle issues or perimenopausal issues through life transitions and moments of crises. And I'm so happy and excited to have my guest with me today, Rianne B. Craft. Welcome, Rianne. Before we dive into anything else, would you maybe like to introduce yourself, your work in the world, what you do, what you're passionate about, anything you'd like to share with us about you?
Thank you. Thanks so much, Lisa. My name's Rianne Beecraft. I use they, them pronouns, queer, non-binary, and I provide coaching for environmental and social change makers. So I spent over a decade of my career in that realm, primarily working for and or with or a consultant to nonprofits and government agencies here in the US. I'm based in the Pacific Northwest. Spent most of my life, not all, but most in Washington and Oregon. Um, and what else do I want to say? My passions are change making still to this day. So my career has seen lots of things, and in my opinion, it's been a strong one for me and a good match career for me. At times, it stopped being a good match for me, so I had to make some sharp turns. And it's a lot of what I help people with. And I think I know change makers who have so much passion and energy and want to help the world so much, and there's so much to do. Of course, then can reach big moments of burnout and despair, understandably. Burnout and despair about kind of the world in general, but then also their own personal life and including their internal realm and their external realm. And so I help people with both.
I love those topics. They are very taboo as well.
Yes,
We're
yes.
shining a light here. Since this today, our chat is a cycle related topic, and I like to lead with that. Let's do a little cycle check in, meaning the day of your cycle that you're on in case you track, and 1, 2, or 3 words for how you are today.
Yeah, so I was glad that you asked this right before we hopped on because you saw my face. I was just like, I have no idea. I just mark on my calendar when my period starts, when my period ends. So with that information and your guidance, I could figure out that supposedly I'm on day 10. And I have these little graphs and charts of the menstrual cycle in front of me to help aid me in this conversation. And you saw my face being like, huh, and looking down at the graphs. And you were like, what's so interesting? And I'm like, I'm just looking at this diagram of what that likely means for what my hormones are doing. And how I'm showing up. excited. I think it's silly sometimes when at the start of podcasts, people are just like, I'm so excited. And I'm like, but I can't help it. It's how I feel. I'm excited. I feel very energized. If we weren't sitting down to do this right now, I'd probably be like running around the house doing goodness knows what, from thing to thing to thing. And um my brain is very stimulated. Yeah.
Welcome. I am on my day 15, which is right smack around ovulation. And I do feel energized on the one hand, but also I can feel my eyes drooping, and like I had a long day. Like due to time zone difference, I'm in the evening right now, so I already had a long day. And I can feel that too. But that doesn't matter because the excitement definitely outweighs all of that. And yeah, thank you for sharing. This is just a very sweet moment to check in with oneself every day to see it. Oh, where am I at? Where's my energy level? Where's my mood? And how can I honor that in my day? Like you might feel tired and inward and have a day full of meetings. So what can you do to support yourself through that day? That is my intention of like bringing your cyclical experience to whatever is at hand.
Yeah, I think it's so helpful, I should say too. People tend to first work with me for career coaching, which I'm stellar at and is kind of one of my areas of emphasis, I should say. And I also do a lot of life coaching and life transition coaching. And so I say you come for the career coaching, you stay for the life coaching. And so what you just described of how are you supporting yourself on the daily and how that varies. And then also how you're supporting yourself kind of big picture and your desires and wants and needs big picture. So it's super related. So I think it was super smart of you to connect, and I appreciate it.
Thank you. Before we dive into this conversation for good, I just want to say this conversation is, of course, not a substitute for professional medical advice. We just hope that with what we are going to share today, that it will help you as the listener or watcher in case you experience any of this, or you have someone in your surroundings who experiences this, to feel less alone in it and to know that there is hope and that there are ways you can support yourself or your loved one through it. I don't even necessarily believe this needs to be diagnosed. Like you don't have to have an official diagnosis of PMDD or whatever other thing it is. For some, it can be really helpful that you finally have a name to it, and then you can do some research around it, but don't get too hung up on it. If you find yourself in the experiences we share about today and you don't have an official diagnosis, trust yourself, trust your body, is what I wanted to say. The key issue in premenstrual dysphoric disorder, so PMDD, is usually intense mood swings, as I've shared, from rage to depression, and also sometimes like some people experience it like being hit by a truck right after ovulation if they track their cycle and know how to connect the dots. Many haven't yet connected that what they are experiencing is connected to their menstrual cycle and that it usually occurs in a certain phase. And we're going to explore all of that. So to dive in, Rianne, maybe because I could nerd out on all of this, but I want to know more about your experience with this. Like, when did you first find out that, or like realize that your cyclical experience is somewhat different to how other people experience their menstrual cycle, and that it might be even harder for you and more difficult to go through it?
Yeah. Well, first, I want to say one of my favorite things is to witness people in their nerd out stages about whatever topic it is. And it makes me want to nerd out so hard too. So I'm like in my complete elated, happy state with this. So thanks for sharing. I always say, like, what makes you start talking? I already speak quickly, but I'm like, what makes you start talking really fast? And not everybody expresses like nerd out or excitement in the same way, but I like
Mhm.
when like you just see somebody's lights turn on in that way. Yeah, so my experience with all this, I'll say I started birth control at 15 for acne. And so that's how I tracked my cycle was the little pills and the colors of the pills. And so that's how I knew kind of what to expect when. And I think back then I just thought truly PMS, like I just thought PMS and it's 2 to 3 days before your period, right? That's what was in my head. And then I don't know, it was for sure a cis man, somebody out there that I'd read on the internet or something heard speak that was like, actually, there's no science to show that this does affect mood, or like, so it could truly just be in people's heads that they have PMS. So I think I was like, it should just be 2 to 3 days before the period, and what if I'm making it up? And when I look back, and then we were like experimenting with birth controls for acne and mood because it did affect my mood. I mean, I would
Mhm.
call my doctor just sobbing. I remember in college just being on my knees and being like, take me off of this now. And she was like, I need you to stay on it. Like, we have to do the full test period before we just take you off and decide that this doesn't whatever, like work for you. And then there was a time where she called and I don't know if it was the same one that I had been complaining about. I think maybe it was. My best friend and I still talk about this because we were on the same birth control. And they were like, they just made their rounds calling and were like, we need to take you off this birth control. Kind of like it had been recalled.
Mhm.
And like, we just need to take you off now. Probably not because of the mood issues, but probably because something else
Mhm.
more directly medical, not that mood isn't, but anyway, so that's I was just like my little like birth control pill pack is what helped me understand where I was, and those were the notions I had about PMS. I look back and I'm like, I don't know what was going on with my hormones at that time and how much of it was because of birth control and how much of it was because of not understanding PMS. But oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. It was like there's just moments I can remember that felt really extreme about that. Um, and then and I never had cramps like I, you know, kind of bending over in pain in terms of physical pain. And I remember being like I feel so lucky because I knew people who did. And then now I'm 36 for the record, and I've been off birth control for 6 years, which has been amazing as a queer person who's no longer taking birth control for acne to help control acne. Um, oh, getting off of it was just so amazing and is still so incredible. Um, for now. And so that was 6 years ago. And then in the last 4 years, maybe COVID, being more at home, maybe you're starting to pay attention to the body a little more, or the self a little bit more. I don't know. I've started noticing some things. And so physically, still no cramps, except for I will get extreme discomfort in my lower back right before I bleed. Sometimes in the last couple cycles, I've been like, excuse me, this is supposed to stop when I start bleeding. Like, this is not the rules. And it kind of
Mhm.
extends another day. So that feels new. In like the last couple years, it would be that I would feel that discomfort, that pain in the lower back. And truly, like the second I started bleeding, it would dissipate the pain.
Mhm.
And usually I would use like ibuprofen or like a CBD mint. Sometimes, well, I always ibuprofen and then sometimes a CBD mint. And within an hour, I would be fine. And so I didn't
Mhm.
need to panic because I knew I just needed to make it through the hour. And that also feels really lucky because I know that's not other people's experience. And I know my experience could change. So, um, but I have had it. There's been a few times that I can remember where even it was just kind of that lower back ache pain where I was like on my knees. And if I hadn't taken ibuprofen in a mint and let it be an hour, like the whole day would have been, I couldn't go to the pumpkin patch or whatever it was that I was going to do that day type of a thing. Emotionally, what feels different, and then I'll end there, on this, what's my experience been? Um, in the last handful of years, I'm guessing that it's been the last handful of years, but I didn't notice until maybe the last year or two of piecing this together. And what made me literally stop in my tracks and be like, maybe something's going on with my period, was I was walking the dog, and this, like you said, it feels like a truck, like you get hit by a truck.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like I just couldn't anymore. Like I was like, am I just gonna collapse on the sidewalk? And not like because of physical pain, emotional, mental, crippling. I don't know that at least that I can remember, I probably have, but had a moment like that before. At least not a moment where I wasn't already horizontal. Like I'm walking and I was like, the neighbors are gonna have to come get me, and I'm gonna be like this hysterical person who can't lift myself. And I was like, well, this feels alarming. So we just like truly need to get back to the house. Because if I do pause, like it's over. And I was like, what? And then you do wonder about depression. You kind of start to feel like Virginia Woolf. Like, you're like, oh, I get Virginia Woolf, maybe, if it, I'm not a Virginia Woolf expert. You can watch the movie The Hours, if anyone hasn't seen it yet, for some insight on that, or read anything by Virginia Woolf. But whew. And so after that, I noticed that I would go through periods, be it around depression or symptoms of ADHD. It all kind of started coming together at once for me. I would literally go, I said this out loud before connecting the dots, crying. I said out loud, I can go like 3 weeks and feel like everything's fine. And between my self coaching and all my tools and my tactics and my techniques and my external support systems, I got it. I'm cruising, baby. Like I'm on my projects. I'm dancing around the house. I'm whatever. And then and then I get so frustrated. And I'm like, where'd my attention span go? I was just like, I thought I was really going to finally be able to complete this big project without a big like attention deficit interruption, or despair. And in those, again, before even connecting the dots, I was in those moments, I would be like, maybe I do need antidepressants. I thought I was doing fine. Maybe I'm not. Maybe I do need ADHD meds. I thought I was doing fine. Maybe I'm not. Like, I need to go to a doctor. And then I wouldn't, because then all of a sudden I would be kind of fine again. And I literally said the word it's like 3 weeks. And then I don't know how, I think a friend one time said, did you know that depending on where you are in your cycle, it can affect your ADHD symptoms? And I looked into that. So that was one thing. And then as for the like depression, despair, like hopelessness, ache, whew, within my romantic relationship at the time, I was like, I need to start making requests around my time. And so I'd be like, hey, I'm going to hermit. I'm going to whatever. And over months, I kind of found a pattern of like, it starts where I'm like cuddly and affection. And then there's a period where I need a hermit. And it's helpful for me and for everyone around me if I communicate about it. So that's what helped me to start really piecing together what might be related to the cycle within the depression despair arena.
Thank you. And my heart really goes out to you for having to experience this. I know everyone's experience is different, and I personally know the moments where I have to lay on the couch for 2 days because even with painkillers, they don't work. And you don't know how long it's going to take until the pain is over. I don't think any of these experiences is better or worse than any other, and they are all, I just want to say it for the record, they are common, not normal. This is not how our cycle experience should be like. And yet we are living in a world that's effed up. So no wonder our cycle experience is effed up. There was a lot in there about what you said. I first found out about, or like when I heard about PMDD, I at the same time talked with a friend who, from my current viewpoint, I know that she was going through that. Because she said, Isa, it's like I want to jump off the balcony for 2 weeks every month. And well, as if that wasn't bad enough, what happens in the other 2 weeks? You usually start dreading that time right before your period or after ovulation, when so basically the whole cycle becomes tainted by this thing. And I know that from my pain experience too, that at the end it's only about like planning your whole life around this occurrence that you might not even know when exactly it is going to happen. And that is a horrible experience. And if you as the listener or watcher experience that, my heart goes out to you too. And again, I want you to know that there is hope. It's not the birth control pill though. And that is another thing that I find so interesting, how it gets prescribed for all sorts of things like acne. Because what is underneath the acne doesn't get treated. We basically, we simulate to the body that you're in perimenopause or in menopause. That is what the birth control pill does. It stops, like most of them, completely stop your cycle. Yes, you do bleed, which is called a withdrawal bleed, because that 1 week you don't get fed the hormones through your pill, so the hormones are withdrawn, and that's why it's called a withdrawal bleed, but it's not a real menstruation because there was no egg ovulating at ovulation. And this is already something that I like, my nerding out is starting, I guess. I have in a lot of conversations with friends connected the dots that it happens very often that people with who are neurodivergent or neuroexpansive, whatever term you want to use, they suffer from PMDD more often than let's say neurotypical people. And there is not much about the reasons to be found anywhere. It's not very well researched, but what is suspected, and that for me aligns with this theory, is that there is something about the sensitivity of the receptors in the brain that is different in neurodivergent people. And because of the sensitivity, they are more sensitive to hormonal shifts in the cycle. That's why these things happen. And to me, then it's completely logical that people who are already wired differently have even more sensitivity to these things and then are more prone to develop PMDD. I find this super fascinating. And again, like maybe we don't need a diagnosis. You have your experience and everyone's experience is unique, and we can find what works for you to support yourself through it. There is a whole study I read about how lymphatic work can help, because the lymphatic system, it's like the second most important system in your body after the nervous system, because it removes all the waste products out of your body and all the toxins and everything and the germs and bacteria and whatnot. And the nervous system apparently uses the lymphatic system to transport all these messenger hormones throughout your body. So if your lymphatic system, which happens for most of us in today's world and lifestyle, the lymphatic system is somehow stagnant or blocked, then these messengers can't go to where they need to go in order for everything to work in unison. And like, so to me, it's such a pity that the modern medical system doesn't really pay attention to this and has nothing better to offer than antidepressants, the birth control pill, or hysterectomy, taking out your uterus and ovaries. And it's a shame that we in our modern world are at such a place where those are the only options. And I can guarantee you they are not the only options. And also, I always say, even with antidepressants, like if they work for you right now, take them if it makes you feel better. And let's simultaneously look at the deeper causes and what we can shift about that, right? Because it's never either or. It's always let's see what works for you in your situation right now so that you can have the feeling that you're at least living a life that's worth living.
Yeah, I see your sigh and your frustration, and that you're like, I need a megaphone to let people know about this. And I know you've got your megaphone, and I know that you're doing that. And I appreciate it. I think, my doctors don't talk to me about my cycle at all. The only way that I even know anything about any of this, which is so minimal, is because I talk about it a lot with my people around me, family, friends, whoever, my clients. And because a lot of my clients are menstruating people. And so sometimes I'm like, hey, I know how this is affecting me. Help me understand what you know, if anything, about how it affects you, just so I can be meeting you where you are. And I talk about it on Instagram in my stories because, one, I like to just not be like, I'm a coach. Here's all the wonderful things about my life and I'm happy all the time. My Instagram account is very different than that. And so when I'm in these periods, I like to speak on it. And I do say in my stories what helps me, right? And I like to model like what communicating about it to loved ones looks like. And supporting yourself through it. And in my sharing that, people have replied. One, people are like, this is so helpful. When I see, I mean, I'll do 10 stories in a row, like 10 story slides, and people stay. They don't tap out. They watch it all the way through. And I've done polls like, is this helpful? Yes, people reply. So one person was like, hey, have you heard of PMDD? I haven't. And here's my experience of what that's been like in the US with insurance and trying to get treatment, support, whatever. So if you can, start going to doctors now and documenting it now because insurance is going to want that proof.
That is definitely the other part of where I find diagnoses helpful. If you need it for your insurance, of course.
Right. Yeah. And if people need to get if they are choosing to get a hysterectomy, which I know people who have for different reasons. I know one person who has for extreme PMS, PMDD, and they say their whole life is different. They said it's amazing. They said if my uterus were going to grow back and I'd have to get a hysterectomy every year, I would.
Do it.
I mean, that's so, and I told them, I said, I do need to start documenting this because I read what my future could look like. And I'm like, no, thanks. I don't want to go through all this. And I hear you, Lisa, being like, that's not the only right way to approach this. And so I love talking about it because, one, I didn't even know about it until somebody DM'd me about it from watching my Instagram stories. Then when I do talk about it, friends will be like, oh, same. And I'm like, interesting. or a friend who told me about the ADHD. I had no idea.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just seems to be left out of the medical system. It's never been talked about when I'm
Yeah,
at the
and
doctor's
also what
office.
I found is that often it gets mistaken for bipolar disorder
Mm-hmm.
because no one makes the connection between, oh, it's happening in certain phases in my menstrual cycle because we are all not taught how the menstrual cycle works. I
Oh,
mean,
absolutely. I could see that completely. Or, is it ADHD mood swings? Is it bipolar? Is it, you know, I don't know what else. And, for me, I'm a Gemini rising. So, like with a mood, I'm
Hmm.
just like, people are like, oh, I don't know, I'm a Gemini. And it's like, okay, what if it's all of the above? And
Hmm.
what if, like, there's more? Um, Go ahead and share. There was something you said, it might return to me, that I wanted to kind of highlight, but go ahead if there's other stuff on your mind right now.
Yeah, something I wanted to say is that why it happens in this particular phase, because usually it's connected to the luteal phase, which is after ovulation. So when the egg has come out of the follicle, and that is the moment when estrogen levels start falling again, and usually progesterone levels would rise. And progesterone is known as the calming hormone. It's prevalent in the second half of our cycle when we ovulate, because in the menstruating years, the only way that, or basically only way that our body produces progesterone is from the leftover follicle after the egg has ovulated. This leftover follicle produces progesterone. So if we, with the birth control pill, stop ovulation, we don't have progesterone. We don't have the calming hormone. Progesterone also has neuroprotective qualities. So we don't get all of that when we stop our ovulation.
Mm,
Again, I'm not saying don't take the birth control pill, because I don't know your situation. There might be good reasons for you to take it. And also, at the same time, let's look at what might be underneath. And if we can get to a place where you feel good without having to basically stop your menstrual cycle through hormones that are external.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But like this shift after ovulation, where suddenly the estrogen levels drop and maybe there is not enough progesterone, that's when this starts happening. And then once we come into the bleed, all the hormone levels are low anyway, and that's usually when these symptoms stop. And people report that once I bleed, I'm fine. I just have to get to that point and make it through. And again, like it can take up to 2 weeks. So that's a long time to have to make it through.
Yeah, and I'll say, as somebody who's a visual learner, I do have this visual in front of me that's really helpful. So if anybody listening or watching wants to kind of rewind and listen to Lisa explain it again while looking at a chart that shows like what's going on in the uterus, what's going on with the hormones, what's going on with the ovary in these different stages. So on my chart, it's saying menstruation, follicular phase, ovulation, luteal phase, which truly yesterday somebody messaged me from my stories, DM'd, and was like, oh my gosh, this is so relevant for me. And I'm on the tail end of my luteal phase. And I was like, please hold while I Google luteal phase. Like I just didn't
Mm-hmm.
know. Um, so just something that might be helpful to look at. I appreciate you sharing that, and it's completely matching up with what I see on this chart. So it's helping it all sink in. Um, in terms of time of like how much it's affecting mood, I think that's a question I do have for myself. I tend to tell people like the despair. For me, I feel so lucky. It's about 1 to 2 days. And so
Mm-hmm.
I can just tell myself like, we know what this is at this point. I mean, newly, right? In the last maybe
Yeah.
year or two, I can say we know what this is, make it through the 2 days. But I don't know. Like I don't know when what starts for
Mm-hmm.
me in terms of mood. And earlier, well, I'll pause there to see if you want to say anything else about that kind of
It's more
duration or
like this
anything
is an
else.
amazing moment to start charting your cycle,
Mm-hmm.
including all the symptoms. And like I do have a free course that's available that will definitely be linked here in the show notes, but which explains about your inner seasons. I like sometimes it's easier, instead of having to remember, oh, which hormone is at what place, when, and what level. To me, it's always easier to go with the seasons. I have an inner winter, which is menstruation, and like outer winter, inner winter is the time where we rest, where there is not much energy, not much is happening. And then inner spring is when everything starts to rise again. That would technically be called the follicular phase. And estrogen rises, and estrogen brings energy. That's why, like in spring, when the sap is rising in the plants, our energy rises. And then at the peak of summer ovulation, we like to be social, many of us, the most social in terms of our cycles, different for introverts and extroverts, of course, but that's usually the time when we have energy. And then in inner autumn or inner fall, the progesterone rises, the calming hormone, so we start retreating back inwards, attuning back to the inner world. And I already see like one point that our society teaches us to be in spring and summer and spring and summer and spring and summer and spring and summer all the time. Our society doesn't value retreating, pruning, resting, which is so important because nature wouldn't be here if we didn't rest every once in a while. And so like that to me is also a symbol of why we struggle so much in this luteal phase, the inner autumn, is because that's not appreciated. You become less productive. Your thoughts might be wandering more, be not as focused as before. And that is all things that our capitalist productive society doesn't value. So of course we have internalized that and then turn it against ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And then another thing that I like to point out, our inner autumn is our truth speaking time. Like outer autumn, like the trees are deciding, okay, I want my juices back in the roots, but I don't need the leaves anymore. So I want to take and keep one thing, but I don't want the rest, or I don't need the rest. They will regrow next spring. So it's a time of reconnecting to our inner truth. And that might, on an unconscious level, mean that we feel this disconnect of, okay, this is my truth, but I'm totally not living it. I'm living a life that I don't actually want to live because it doesn't align with my own values. And I know that many people are trapped in that situation. I know I have been. And so this inner disconnect causes stress to the nervous system. And well, stress exacerbates any kind of symptoms. So it would, of course, also exacerbate these things and moods and whatnot. So for me, that's a sign of, okay, where can I live my life more in alignment with who I am? And for many people, this is helpful when I share it. In case of PMDD, there is definitely the hormonal and sensitivity component. So like me saying, live more aligned with your truth will probably not do the whole trick and might actually even sound, I don't know, aggravating to some people. I don't mean this to be light. Like, I don't mean it lightly. I'm fully aware that there are other components and it's not as easy as, oh, just set your boundaries and everything will be fine.
Right. Yeah.
Does this resonate in some way?
Oh yeah, completely. I mean, a huge amount of what I speak to and my platform in quotes is about unlearning social constructs, external familial societal teachings that do not align with us, right? And actually figuring out your own beliefs, belief systems, values, interests, desires, and all of that, and starting to live from that place, which is quite the journey. It can be quite difficult. Some parts of it are easier than expected. Some of them are way harder than expected. And I find it interesting of, you know, I'm a fire sign. I'm an Aries sun. I'm a Gemini rising. I'm a Leo moon. I'm a Capricorn, like
Whoa.
dominant chart. And so I'm like ambitious and I tend to work with really ambitious people, idealists, and we go. We want to fucking go, especially in change making, right? And we do get energized, right? And you know, be it ADHD or this part of my cycle, and I'm in my summer, like let's go. And literally I'm in summer. I'm like, let's do it. When we're in those like ambitious, high energy phases, for whatever reason that we are in those phases, what life decisions are we making that are going to set us up for extreme hardship when we're in our winter, be it within the month or within the year or the 2 years or the 3 years. And so historically, when people would recommend like balance and like being more tempered in things, I was like, I want to scream. Don't talk about balance to me. I operate in extremes. I've got it, right? I've got it. I know how to operate in my extremes. Actually, compartmentalizing is great for me. Don't talk to me about that. Don't try to moderate this. Let me be me. Let me like out of this cage. And then you turn 36 and or whatever. I mean, I've been like, oh, okay, maybe there is something to being more tempered. Which is not like silencing my personality, which is not silencing my ambition. I always tell people, I'm not trying to shrink our ambition. Absolutely not. I'm asking questions about what sustains us in our ambition and what sustains our ambition. And I don't even think we need to be ambitious all the time. I literally don't think that's superior. I don't think that that's morally superior. But if it lives within people, then let's honor that and take care of that. And so it feels really linked. You asked if this was resonating. It feels really linked to kind of the seasons that you were describing, and maybe drawing attention to these seasons can happen at more of a micro level within a week, within a month, rather than, you know, sometimes we'll be like, I'm in my slow era or I'm in my villain era or whatever. And we talk about it more like we think we're in these big cycles, which we can be, but what's happening smaller temporally than that.
Yeah, and you know, like these 4 phases that I described, you have them in one day. Like in our winter is night, in our spring is morning, noon is in our summer, and afternoon, evening is autumn. We have it in a life. So the phase of youth is spring. The phase of adulthood, maturing, is summer. The phase of perimenopause for menstruating folks is in our autumn. And then we have the winter phase of the like the crone or the wise elder, like old age, that in the society is also ageism and stuff. But like life is cyclical, the whole life, like everything that we touch is cyclical. Healing is cyclical. Time is cyclical, I dare say.
Yeah, and I wonder, you know, for me, like night could be maybe is supposed to be winter, but ooh, I have my 10 p.m. I call it my second wind, and it's right on time every night. And like folks with ADHD who I talk with, they'll say they're like 10 p.m. That's when you want to rearrange the whole room. That's when you know, the furniture in the room, whatever, and you're working till 2 a.m. And yet, and that isn't something to be ashamed of, and there's no problem with that, except for if you're living in a life where you're expected to be up and out of the house by whatever time in the morning to match how society operates. And so I just wanted to say that too, is for anyone listening who's like, well, Lisa named the seasons and how they occur in a day, but mine feel really different from that. I am like, I see you, you know, like I see
And
it.
thank you for bringing that up, by the way. That's why I always say, just because the way I described in our winter, spring, summer, and autumn as in terms of energy doesn't necessarily mean that your cyclical experience will be like that. That's why I say chart your own cycle, because it's always on a spectrum and your experience might be different. And for example, me too, I'm a total night owl. That's why I've rearranged my business to be more towards the evening when I'm actually awake, And that's why I'm like a lot with people from the US, because that's when they are awake.
It's
You
such an
know,
incredible
you do
example.
you, and like your high energy phase might be a different phase than noon or summer. Also because that might be too much heat. And people in, for example, Spain, they hold siestas, and I guess Mexico or like these types of countries, they hold siestas because it's just too hot. And that is fine too. So maybe in your inner summer, you need to retreat. But you won't know until you've started charting your cycle on a daily basis. And it can be as easy as we did our cycle check in the beginning. Like, what day are you on? Which phase are you in? And what are 3 words that describe how you are today? And then over time, you will find patterns.
Yeah, and I will. That reminds me, I did track. I'm proud of myself. I don't know if it was for a year or more. It was vanity inspired.
Mm-hmm.
I started tracking my cycle, to try to figure out what's going on with my acne breakouts,
Mm.
and figure out like what could I do to support my skin at different times. And I started tracking other things too, like mood or whatever, on the app. I figured out, in quotes, figured out. Um, I found a pattern with the acne, which I shared with you earlier off this call, of how like I'll make it through my whole period and everything and be like, I made it without any breakout. And then I get breakout, like deep, like hormonal cystic acne in 1 or 2 places after.
Mm.
And it just happened again. I was like, I made it. And I don't know why every month I think that. And then it's like, here we are. But I figured that out too, or found that pattern with the app. And then as for the moods, and this is where I'm like, and then I'm like, okay, how much of this is ADHD or something? Because the moods did feel inconsistent and more variable. I wonder now, with what I know about myself and now what I know about my ADHD that I did not know then, how bringing awareness to that would help me observe patterns differently.
Mm. There's only one way to find out.
I know.
Start charting. um, yeah, but like these are some ideas of what could actually help support yourself, support someone else. Those were the ideas that I, as someone who does not suffer from PMDD, has to say is like, look at where you are in your cycle so you can pre-plan, prepare, like you say, tell my partner that I want to hermit at that time, or tell my partner that I need XYZ, or tell my loved one, my kids, my whoever you live with, or even if you're single, then it might be even easier, but like whoever you need to ask for support, a friend maybe, to give you that support. That at the same time already helps you ask for what you need or what you want and express your, I like to call it sacred yes and no. Like that is what this phase actually can really help us discern. It's like, what do I want to say yes to because it feels good for me in my body? And what do I want to say no to because it's actually just draining my energy? And this will not happen on the first try. And that's okay. You will have another cycle where you can train this. The thing is just this phase is a moment for us where we can go like, okay, what do I really need? And it's hard because society says, especially as someone socialized as woman, you're supposed to put your needs last, or you're not even supposed to have any needs. So we aren't in touch with them. And that can be even harder to get in
Mm-hmm.
touch with them, allow ourselves to have them, and then even ask for them being fulfilled.
Oh yeah.
And yeah. What
Yeah.
other tips do you have that have helped you or that you've seen other people support themselves with? Is there anything else you want to mention?
Well, yeah, I put 3 categories, and the first one was communication. So communication with the self, communication with the people around me, give people a heads up. Sometimes I can get really specific if it matters, if I'm sharing accommodations or um, living in the same space as somebody, then it can be really extra important to communicate with them. Um, Needs, things like that. Communication with the self, I remind myself not to believe my thoughts, especially in those 1 to 2 days. So that's the most gaslighting I'll be to myself in my life, is just be like, we're not. We're just not gonna, hold on, hook into these thoughts. Just make it 1 to 2 days, which is good advice in general. Like when you're at your lowest of lows, like don't believe your thoughts about yourself and about your life. With that though, I have heard that PMS can bring up things that are already there, like things that are underneath. It just really can bring them to surface or make them really loud. In my experience, that's true. Like my sadness about the state of the world, humanity, uh, frustrations in my own relationships, whatever it is, they're already there and they surface. What tends to happen for me, or something I'm wondering and will keep paying attention to, is I lose the like, and here's what's good. And here's where the hope is. Here's where the optimism is. But asking myself to have hope in those 1 to 2 days, no,
Forget
I don't
it.
need to ask myself. I don't even need, it's not going to happen. I don't need to ask that of myself. It's just almost better for me to be like, I know what this is. I promise it'll feel different
Yeah.
either tomorrow morning or the next morning. And I feel so sad for people who have to experience it longer than that. And I'm worried for myself about it going longer than that eventually. But that's something that's helped: the communication to others, communication with self. And then the two other categories I put, the first one is like grounding and down regulating. And the second one is up regulating, which is really interesting. The grounding and down regulating, I've noticed that, especially as somebody with ADHD, it's really good to have different things to reach to, because I like novelty. It can get boring to do the same thing. So one thing is I'll start like an art project or a ritual 3 days in advance of when I think like the big emotional hit is gonna come. And so I'm already like interacting with beauty and positivity. And then I return to it in those days that are difficult, maybe continue building it out. Like maybe it's a collage piece or something, with magazine clippings, or maybe I'm journaling on what I already created, or maybe I wrote a poem in advance and I just recite that poem over and over for those days. And it's an outlet. It's a way of holding myself. It's a way of letting, the word I use of like divinity, spirit hold me, art, beauty, nature hold me, and hold the emotions that are there. So it's like this little container. The two other things that I put under the grounding and down regulating category is just nature. Having nature hold me, going and connecting with nature. And then I wrote comforting entertainment. So there's entertainment in general, but comforting. So favorite shows, movies, things like rom-coms. The biggest thing about letting myself just lay in bed and watch those things and indulge is I'm treating myself kind of like I would on a sick day and just letting myself do that. And I know it's a way of taking care of myself and my emotions. And it feels like a healthy form of distraction. So it's engaging my brain in something that already feels sweet to me. Um, so that's that category. I can go into the upregulating category, and I will, but I just want to pause because that was already a lot, and just see if you have anything to say about that category.
I have a few things I want to say afterwards, but with regards to what you just said, I love that because I had this conversation yesterday actually with a client, and she was, but I'm grieving now, and like, she experienced a loss, and I'm grieving, and I should stay in this grief, and like I feel I need to do the grief right and not distract myself with uplifting things because I'm supposed to grieve now. And I was like, yes, you're supposed to feel your feelings. That's true, because that brings healing. And also give yourself a certain time frame to really grieve for, I don't know, 10, 15 minutes, and then do something completely opposite that is uplifting. Like you say, watch your favorite movie, watch a rom-com, uh, go for a dance, whatever it is, because you're not, while you're supposed to feel your feelings, you don't have to drown in them. It is completely okay. And sometimes even when you experience something traumatic, the first reaction is to distract ourselves. And that is okay because it's a lot to take on your system. And if the way for you to cope with it is to, first of all, distract yourself, that's okay. Full permission. I guarantee this thing stays in your body until you have the capacity to deal with it. And that doesn't have to be today, nor tomorrow, nor next week.
Yeah, if somebody could play those last couple of lines just like on repeat, that little of those two lines that you said, or that last line that you said, just like, doesn't need to be now. It doesn't need to be now. Yeah, and I think so this leads into the upregulating where we can get that message a lot of like tend to the self and ground and meditate and like, yes, I literally do all of those things. They're such huge parts of my support. When I'm in those 1 to 2 days of despair and throughout the rest of my month. But upregulating, like something I found for me is if I am physical, again, it's kind of starting the 2 to 3 days before the despair pit, where I'm like, I'm just going to start going on runs, or I'm going to do like a nature hike or a nature walk or something, and I'm going to do it for the next 6 days. And I start it before, so I'm already taking initiative. I'm getting into that momentum, and then I make myself do it even on the days of despair because it's already started. It's like it gives me momentum through those 2 days where I'm not asking myself to suddenly pick up something I hadn't done in 10 days or 12 days when I don't have it. And times where like I used to hate this advice when people be like, well, go work out anyway or run anyway. It still makes me want to scream. Also, just like trying to tell an Aries what to do. Good luck. But so for me, I'm like, okay, what I have seen that sometimes physical exertion is really helpful. It's even more helpful for me if I've done it the 2 to 3 days in advance of that despair. It
Do you
doesn't
want to
feel like
hear
I'm
my take on why that could be?
Yeah, oh gosh, please.
My brain was just like, well, yeah, for you, this exercise brings serotonin, like the feel-good hormone. So you've got an extra dose of serotonin before you hit that low. Of course, that will make it easier.
There we go. Okay, well, thank you for that. And so for other people, it wouldn't necessarily, you think, feel as useful.
Well, that depends on the person. So I'd
Yeah.
say try at
Yeah,
least three
try it.
times for it, like to really assess whether it's working or not. Once might not do the trick. Try at least 3 times and see what happens. I
Yeah,
absolutely think it could be beneficial. But not everyone like enjoys going for a hike or a
right,
run or anything. So like
right,
I can't say it will do it because it will help you because it might not be true for you. But try.
right. And people have different physical abilities. And so, whatever it
Yeah.
is where is it like getting the heart rate up or something? I don't know. Getting the
But
blood
even as you
pumping.
say, doing something creative that you then
Mhm.
basically feed on and nourish your soul when you're in there is also like it brings you joy while you create it.
Right.
And then you can like use that joy for the hard days.
Yeah, and I'd say too, like sometimes people are like, I don't have time for this. Like if myself 10, 15 years ago heard that then I sat down and I wrote a poem and I made a collage and I put the pine cones around it to take a pretty photo to keep looking at because it soothed me, I'd be like, what are you talking about?
Mm-hmm.
I don't have time for that. And I also don't have the attention span for that.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so boring. Don't make me move slow, all of this type of stuff. Um, and so when we each find like what is the the grounding moments and exercises for you, um, what can happen when you slow down because you're taking care of yourself and you're curious about it, and then you see what benefits exist for you,
Mm-hmm.
and you'll find your flavor of it. Like, well, you don't want to move so slow for so many days, but then it backfires and now you're so stressed because everything's built up. Like, I understand that too. But just playing with it and seeing when we say like, I don't have time for that, what time are you actually gaining back? And what mood
Mm-hmm.
are you actually gaining back by being proactive
Mm-hmm.
on these types of things? So with the upregulating, oh, so physical, we talked about that. Social. So this is another form of healthy distraction. I'm not going to exhaust myself and make myself like be this social butterfly. I'm not going to force myself to be cheery and the comedian and all of
Mm-hmm.
this, but just being around people and them talking about their life and maybe they're in a good mood and it takes you out of yourself and it takes you out of those despair thoughts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I can be around people, but then I'm gonna like hermit in my room and just be like mopey in the house. That's really different too. It's like if we're kind of like scheduled, like we're gonna go on the walk now and then we're gonna and if I have it in me, right? Or can I push myself to just say yes because I know what the alternative will look like?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I won't. I truly, so I will say this, depending on some of these things that I do for myself, sometimes I won't. I'm like, it didn't come this month. It didn't happen this month. And it's because I was hanging out with my sibling and nibblings or my friends or whoever for 3 days straight. And we were doing activities and yard games and whatever. And it didn't really come, or it did come, but way lighter and for less time.
Mm-hmm.
And then you can be like, so am I making this up?
Mm-hmm.
And you're just like, and then you're like, no, I'm not making it up. There's these things that help, and I'm learning that. The
I just want to
final,
say, once your brain goes, am I making this up? The answer is always no. Doctors will tell you yes.
yeah,
Let me tell you, no. The answer is always no when you already ask yourself this question.
yeah. So the final thing under upregulating is what I call, so I had comfort entertainment under grounding and downregulating. And for upregulating, I put dumb entertainment. It's like happy-go-lucky, silly shows. You're like guilty pleasure shows or podcasts that are so silly and dumb. Maybe they just talk about celebrities and celebrity culture, which I truly cannot give myself to give any shits about. And that's why it's good for me, because
Mm-hmm.
otherwise my thoughts are on only the things that I care deeply about and am
Yeah.
heartbroken around. So let me listen to this stupid thing where people are making each other laugh. And yeah, dumb entertainment can help with like upregulating and like hook my brain because they produce these shows in a way that really hook you. Um, but they just don't matter. So that is, I'm sure there's things I'm missing. I also just do daily things for myself every day. Um, the journaling that I do, the energetic work on myself that I do, so that maintains throughout as well.
Thank you. That was a fabulous list. And I think that will be of massive help for anyone listening, suffering from this. And there will be a little bit of something for everyone there and enough ideas to spark inspiration. The things that I want to add without making this go too long is for me, because I have a training in female health, what I know and found through that training is that there are three majorly important systems in your body that are more important than the other systems because they are here to keep you safe and alive. That is the nervous system, the lymphatic system, and the digestive system. And because PMDD is also playing out on a physical level, that's why I want to mention these. The nervous system is key because only in a relaxed nervous system state can the body do its repair processes, its maintenance processes, rest and digest and heal. So we need to make sure that for every time we experience stress, because stress isn't bad, but if in excess, it's always like everything in excess for too long will deplete us. So we need to make sure if we like to be excited a lot to also have resting phases. And rest, by the way, there are 7 types of rest. Rest doesn't just mean sleeping or lying on the couch. Rest can be social rest. being with people, like all the things you mentioned, like having these dumb shows on or podcasts on can be a form of rest for your brain. So like, don't get me wrong. There's not just one type of rest, but having this to counterbalance the time when your nervous system is on high alert and high vigilance, because this will always exacerbate any sort of symptoms. The lymphatic system I already addressed in the beginning. That is, for one, a communication pathway for the nervous system to send messages, but also just for all the waste and body products, like metabolic waste, to get out of the system so your cells can live in a healthy environment. And then the third system will be the digestive system that needs to work, so that your body can take in the nutrients that you put in with your food, because in order to produce the hormones at the levels they need to be produced, and for example to produce serotonin, that is produced mainly in the gut. So if your gut isn't working well, you might not take in the right, like you might not be able to absorb the right nutrients that are important for serotonin production. And then we, of course, have this cycle that spirals down. Less serotonin might mean your nervous system is more activated, more nervous system activation brings up other issues. And so if these three systems are well and healthy and in order most of the time, like 80%, I do believe that everything else will sort itself out. So that's why my approach always goes to nervous system, lymphatic system, digestive system. And nervous system also includes psycho-emotional work and spiritual work. Because as you also say, like this connection to the divine, whatever way, shape, or form that takes for you, is calming, because it means that you're not alone in this. It means you are held by some loving force that is greater than you, that exists in this universe. And you understand that like this life isn't meant for suffering. This life is meant for living. And sometimes it means shitty experiences. And you've got the capacity to make it through.
Very well said.
So to start closing this down, because like I think we've covered a lot of ground today. In case you as the watcher or listener have any questions or would like to reach out to us, please do. We will provide, or I will provide, everything you need in the show notes. But Rianne, just let us know very briefly where can folks find you? Where do you tend to hang out most? Do you love to be? Where are you most excited? We know Instagram stories.
Yeah, you know my Instagram stories. You can follow me on Instagram. It's at, and then my first and last name, Rianne Becraft, Rianne Becra. F as in Frank, T as in Tom. I'm not very active on the grid, very active in the stories. It is a private account, so just click request. When I find that you're not a bot, I let you in. And if anybody wants to book a one-on-one coaching session with me for career life coaching, especially those change makers out there experiencing burnout, frustration, they just want more spaciousness in their life, more joy, enjoyment, friendship, things like that. You can go to my website. It's www.rbcraft.com. And if you mention this podcast and Lisa's name, I can give you 20% off for first-time clients on a single session. I know. The last thing I'll say is I do have, you and I talked about more aligned living and the journey of that. If you're new to that journey or have been on the journey for a while, the free resource I've made for folks is wonderful. I actually use it all the time with my clients. Quite proud of it. It's called the Meaningful Life Manual, and it's 4 critical questions for purpose-driven people who want to enjoy more in life. And that you can just go to my website. It's rbcraft.com/meaningful, and you can get that for free.
Yay! Oh, I will definitely make sure to link all of that below. Those are amazing resources. and a generous offer. Thank you so much in the name of my listenership, my watchers. Yeah, thank you so much for being here with me, for wondering and pondering and musing and asking and sharing and supporting on this taboo topic. Is there now at the end anything you want to add or reiterate, a message that you want to send to folks out there? Anything you would like to add?
Yeah, thanks for that. I think first, sometimes I worry talking about this that somebody might be like, see, this is why we can't have a woman president or a woman prime minister or something, because they're just going to hit the nuclear bomb like button or the war button when they're PMSing. And I literally wrote out like 4 rebuttals to this that nobody has said to me recently, 3, and I won't go through them all. But people who don't menstruate, people who were assigned male at birth, um, whatever people, whatever's going on in people's bodies, they all have emotional highs and lows and egotistical fits. And we sometimes are like, anger is strong and okay, but empathy is weak and will lead to poor decision making. It's just so much sexism within that line of thinking. And also, obviously, people who menstruate, people who are assigned female at birth, socialized as women, trans people, non-binary people, intersex people, all of this have been incredible leaders since the beginning of the human species, are strong, fucking hold up this planet and families and communities and society. A lot of where the good comes in comes from these people, and they're still really strong, badass leaders every day. And it's okay in the days that we don't have it in us to be, but I'm just want to name all of that of like, despite all this hormonal chaos that we've experienced from puberty, look at these folks and all that they hold for themselves and others. The final thing I'll say is, just if anyone listening is experiencing gender dysphoria or anything like that, as we spoke, I see you. Some of the terminology doesn't resonate. I see you. I'm somebody who is fine talking. I'll talk about bleeding and my cycle. I know some people use like moon cycle or something. And it was interesting listening to you talk about like eggs. I was like, oh, I'm not used to talking about that. And I um don't love thinking about that I have eggs. And I don't know how much of that is like a gender experience for me, or gender dysphoria, or somebody who, again, so I was 15, I was like, I just know I don't want biological children, and that hasn't changed. And so I don't know if it's more related to that or if it's linked, but I just wanted to say, I see you. I don't need to understand what that rub was for me today. It was interesting, and maybe at some point it'll click in, of what's behind that. And I'm not in a rush to figure that out. So just sending hugs out there to anybody who was noticing things like that within their self too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Really, thank you for mentioning that, because as much as I try to be a safe enough space, I know that like I don't have that experience, so I might say something that doesn't resonate with people. And I'm sorry if it has triggered anything in you. And also, we can always talk about these things, in my
Yeah, I
opinion.
appreciate you saying that. I didn't say anything earlier because I was like, I don't want Lisa to think that I'm saying don't use those words for this podcast, because that's what I didn't want you to
Yeah.
think or change. I actually wouldn't be asking for a change. Um, it was more of like a noticing of myself. Um, And, in a future podcast, if I was like, we're using eggs in general, but for me, I'm going to use this funny, cute term that I like for myself, then that, to me, that's on me to know. And I didn't know. And so
Yeah.
that's for me to know and communicate. but
Yeah,
I
then we have it.
appreciate the language.
Communication. That's the
Yeah.
thing we need more of. Honest and open communication.
Yeah, I've appreciated the language you've used just in our, calls friendship prior to this and on this um entire call. So I really appreciate you being so gender inclusive in the way that you have. You've shown up in such just an immensely wonderful, positive, supportive way the whole way through.
Thank you. And by the way, life is cyclical. Everybody is cyclical. We all have cycles. Yes, figure that.
Exactly.
Like
Exactly.
everyone, we just operate on different kinds of cycles. So again, it's up to you to chart your own cycle, whatever the cycle base it is that you use. And even when you've crossed over into menopause, you might go along the moon cycle if that speaks to you, or if you
Hmm.
don't have your reproductive organs, or not anymore. In all those cases, you could turn to the moon cycle or to the daily cycle or to the yearly cycle, whichever calls to you. So, yeah.
Exactly.
Again, thank you for being here. It was an amazing conversation. And yeah, I guess it won't be our last conversation.
Yeah.
So, looking forward to speaking again soon.
Same. Thank you so much, Lisa.
Bye.
Bye.